provide mediation.
Thank you so much, Sharon. It's my pleasure. And we're very grateful to both you and Shante, and also to all of our volunteer mediators. Thank you so much.
Okay, have a nice afternoon.
Thank you, you too. Bye-bye.
All right. So thank you.
I want to make one comment to our group. Susan mentioned some unfortunate people who have mental health problems and are unable to, they're really unable to go ahead with an investigation. However, mediation has taken a number of those cases. Interestingly enough, very often people will complain about devices implanted in their head, but they're suffering a mental health problem, but they are certainly rational and able to function in a way where mediation can help. And we have a wonderful Sergeant Kelly Kruger, who is on the Department of Police Accountability, and the San Francisco Police Department. She's a trained psychiatric nurse who is now a police officer, and we ask her to come in along with our mediators to help explain as well as we can what the issue is, and then Kelly will provide referrals and future assistance to people. So it's, again, one of the things that you as mediators do to help members of the community who truly suffer and are often without resources. Thanks, Shante. I'll let you pick it up now.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Yeah, so that was really great, and I think it lends itself to some of the information, as you guys noted, that we presented on the statistics and what gives rise to cases that end up in mediation and why they get returned. And so much of it, I mean, we've talked about technology, but so much of it sometimes ends up being, like Susan said, we'll try to get back into contact with them. But oftentimes what ends up happening is the first time that they made contact with our office is honestly the last time that they make contact with our office. So sometimes, they might be transient. They might have phones, that require additional monies to be at, like a prepaid phone, and all of the difficulties. And so, I always think about how can we better access the community. Our information is online, but if they don't have a computer, walking to our office is basically non-existent now. There's the phone, but there's limitations to that. So always being aware, always being mindful, and then constantly doing outreach. So we implore you in your day-to-day activities to talk about the work and the role that you have here at DPA as mediators, because the word gets out and it goes down the grapevine, if you will. But without further ado, I'd love to introduce a friend, Maria Young, who is a speaker, therapist, and diversity trainer. And she brings to us today this presentation on mindful facilitation and bridging the divide. Maria is a trainer and she trains interdisciplinary professionals who work with a diverse clientele. She recently provided a workshop working with diversity regarding techniques and interventions that inspire and motivate collaboration for the annual California Association of Family and Conciliatory Courts earlier this year for those professionals in the family court system. Maria's training began in 2012 when she participated as well as facilitated an interpersonal dynamics group to help mental health professionals forge strong relationships with people who are culturally different from them. She continues to receive training in cross-cultural facilitation with stir-fry seminars that specializes in mindful techniques to enhance understanding of the impact of cultural relationships, as well as how to develop a more authentic sense of community within diverse groups. Maria holds a master's in counseling psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies, as well as a bachelor's in neuroscience from University of California, San Diego. Suffice to say, incredibly talented, incredibly smart, and just so incredibly grateful that she's able to share her time with us today. And so, Maria, I will pass the ball to you.
Thank you, Shantae. Thank you, Sharon, for inviting me to provide this presentation. As you guys saw, this is a facilitation, mindful facilitation. So a lot of times mindfulness is thought of as transcendental, but I think professionally it can be used as where you are as a facilitator, as a mediator. And I think we've talked about the police and we've talked about the citizens, but what's really important is you. How are you and where are you as a mediator? And when I think of mindfulness as a facilitator, I think of emptying my mind, emptying my heart, emptying myself of all the feelings that I might have. Because at the end of the day, you are providing a container for these two parties who might be adversarial, who might be emotional. So really checking in and being mindful of where you are is essential, is as essential as really recognizing the feelings and emotions that comes up for the two parties. And I will go on through this presentation, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask me a question or make a statement. And I was very deliberate about the pictures that I have here because, a lot of times when we're mediating two parties, sometimes it's really hard to empathize with the parties. And what's really important is to know that a lot of times the emotions might be coming up for them. And that emotion really is a primal emotion. So sometimes it does come from a place of, a younger part of them where they do feel afraid and intimidated and a lot of the negative feelings that might arise during a mediation. Next slide, please, Shantae. So I'm not going to go too much into it, but the training objectives of mindful facilitation is really observing what is said and what is not said. So really reading into the nonverbals. And when you're working with a culturally diverse person or party whose culture you don't recognize, a lot of the answers lies in the nonverbal. So perhaps they might look away, they might look down. There might be a facial, indication of what they're feeling, although they might say everything is fine, I'm okay. But it's really important for you to notice these nonverbals, and noticing the intent and impact of all communications. And so the police officer might have an intent to do his job, but the impact on the client or the citizen might be that what they're really trying to bring in. I was hurt, I felt unsafe, and really being able to provide all that emotions to come in and point out the intent and point out the impact so that the two parties feel heard and seen, and it can progress. The mediation can progress rather than come at a standstill. And understanding how the impact of our life experiences can affect our attitudes and behaviors. And this comes for all of us, right? The mediators, we come from a certain background in our life experiences where we might see the police officer in a certain way, or the citizen, we might have challenges with that certain nationality or ethnicity or culture that we don't understand. And we might have some personal issues around that. Learning how to listen and respond effectively and compassionately, and becoming aware of the culture and relationships. So I think we can skip this and go on to the next slide. So I want to provide the possibility that empathy is strategic. A lot of times people don't consider empathy as strategic, but it actually is a way to engage with the clients, because we do want to, or not the clients, but the police officer and the citizen who might be really upset. And so the 4 attributes of empathy, just in case you might be wondering what exactly is empathy, it's to be able to see the world as others see it. And it might be different from yours. It might be different from the other party. Be non-judgmental. Understand another person's feelings. Communicate the understanding of that person's feelings. Next slide, please. So the neurobiology of emotional safety. The reason why empathy is strategic is because it does work with the neurobiology of safety. Next slide. So I'll read this out loud, but you can read along with me. All perceptions in our environment are rooted through the thalamus. From there, the amygdala, the threat sensor in the brain, reacts to threats, unfamiliar stimuli, conditioned fears, and perceived threats in as few as 50 milliseconds long before conscious thoughts come into play. So what does this mean as a mediator? When, even before anyone speaks, they are already responding to the stimuli. They're feeling unsafe, and they're determining whether you as a mediator is safe, because they may not feel that the police officer is safe, or the police officer may feel their fear. And so when they're in this reptilian side of the brain, it's really hard for them to access that executive brain, which you need them to be in, which is to really be able to expand and understand and empathize with the other person. And when they are in their reptilian brain, a lot of times there is the fight, flight, or freeze response. So they might be confrontational during the mediation, which will make the mediation very difficult. They might have a flight response where they just start to become avoidant. And culturally, some people culturally are more avoidant than others. And so on top of their, emotional responses, because of the mediation, they might actually check out of the mediation, or they might have a freeze response. And at that point, they're not even in the room. And so it takes place, and there's a cognitive input from executive functions in the prefrontal cortex that you cannot utilize. Does anyone have any questions before I move on to the next slide?
Maria, I just had a comment about what you just said. When they're in that reptilian part of their brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it brought me back to a mediation we did where, the complainant was pretty distraught over a situation. But when you talk about culture and how some, people, because of their culture, might be more avoidant, this complainant also brought a support person with her. And I visually saw the complainant almost withdrawing. And at that point, the support person stepped in and began talking for the complainant, understanding everything that she was dealing with. And so that, I think it's something that is helpful. And, for me, it jogged my memory regarding that in some cases, for people who are aware of how they might react, overreact, freeze, they may bring somebody with them to help, calm them down or speak for them in these instances, just to help the mediation flow. So.
Thank you. Thank you. I was feeling quite nervous too doing this presentation, and my amygdala was hijacked. So you stepping in made me feel a lot more calmer and, slowed me down. So I just wanted to demonstrate how it does have an effect when a supportive party is there. And I do want to note that pink little dot in that picture, which is the amygdala, and it acts very, very quickly. And so again, it acts faster than the conscious mind. And so your body might be responding to a threat that might not even be there in the mediation. And this is also something that we as mediators, experience as well. Is our amygdala hijacked? How are we holding the two parties together, as well as really looking at the two parties and checking to see how their amygdala is hijacked? And I think of the amygdala as a fire alarm or some sort of alarm in a building where it starts to blare and you can't think or even see anything else in front of you. And all you see is this crisis. And it's the sprinkler turning on, and it really requires a great deal of going back and calming, the self down. So really checking in and looking at the nonverbals um, and checking in to see where people are. A lot of time they might have a flat affect where their faces are flat and they might be in the freeze, or they might be fidgety. And in a mediation that I saw with the DPA a few months ago, the woman, the complainant, just kept tying her hair and she kept moving around and she looked really agitated. And that was either the um, flight or freeze response that she was exhibiting. And if the mediator had said, it looks like this is really hard for you, it looks like it's really stressful for you, that naming it can actually calm the person down. Unfortunately, it wasn't brought in, and the emotions was not addressed, and so it just kept getting emotional, and I could see that she was getting more agitated than initially.
Maria, we had a situation that's very similar to that, where a complainant had 2 mediations with us over a period of a 2-week period.
Mm,
In the first, this gentleman was extremely rigid. He had a very flat affect, and we found it very difficult, and the mediators found it very difficult to not necessarily communicate with him, but to understand what was happening to him. In the second mediation, and it was different, the issues were different. He was an entirely different person. He was
mm,
animated, he was
mm-hmm,
cordial, he wasn't exhibiting any defensive moves.
mm-hmm.
So is this a result of the issue at hand and how he was responding to the issue?
It could be a lot of factors. It could be feeling a level of unsafety initially in the first session. And in the session, he probably felt comfortable because he knew the procedure, he knew what was going to happen. And so that in itself is the containment. This container, um, the TPA mediation is comfortable and familiar. And I'm not sure, maybe it was the mediator who made this person feel comfortable.
Mhm.
And also, it's really important to know that visually, if you're culturally different from a person, they might feel a sense of threat. Um, for instance, if you're a Caucasian mediator and it's a person of color, um, they might feel a sense of wonder if you will understand them culturally. And
Mhm.
so being really conscious of that, and even naming, I understand that culturally we're different, but I'm going to try really hard to try to understand you. And I'm thinking of my own father. We immigrated from the United States, from Burma. And when I think of these diversity trainings, I think of my parents, because I think of how they would like to be treated, how they would like to be welcomed, and what would happen to them. And I know that if they were to go into mediation, their amygdala would be really hijacked. And I would wonder how the mediator would really hold them, because it would be hard for them to really express some of their feelings, and really get to the root of um, what they're looking for, maybe an apology and understanding from the police officer. And so I think that's a really important piece to hold as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next slide, please. So the polyvagal theory just goes into it a little bit deeper. And I brought this up particularly because when a person is feeling unsafe, their physiological states to respond to their level of safety, they go through 3 steps. One is social engagement. The second, well, let's start with social engagement is the first level. We call out for support, help, and comfort from the people around us. But if no one comes to our aid, or we're in immediate danger, the organism reverts to a more primitive way to survive. And so imagine a person feeling, whether it's a police officer or whether it's the complainant, they're looking around the mediation to find help, support, and comfort from the people around them. And so that oftentimes is a mediator. And so really understanding how you're holding um, the mediation is extremely important. because if they're not feeling safe, then they will move into the fight or flight, or even freeze or collapse. And so once you have the fight or flight, once that's activated, it's really hard for them to revert back. And so being really mindful of their nonverbals and their facial features and how they are is extremely important. They can feel that they can't get away because they're stuck in the mediation. They might want to leave, but they know that they have to see it to fruition. And they might have some sort of self-preservation by shutting down, or they might be confrontational, in which case that would make mediation really hard.
Maria, I liken this to essentially victim advocates.
Mhm.
Because having a support person, a comfort person, going through, like when you're discussing or reliving something that was difficult in a moment of time, the victim advocates, if a case goes to trial at the district attorney's office, the victim services unit will deploy an advocate to stick with that victim or survivor from the moment, the case lands through the criminal process. And, oftentimes the advocates will stand behind or beside the victim just as a support person. And I think this essentially speaks to that. And I couldn't help but envision that as you were talking. So thank you for this.
Yeah. So even imagining yourself when you're in a hard situation, when you're maybe going to the doctors for news of what's going to happen, or when you have a bad news, it's, someone calls you, you really look around yourself to look for that safety, to look for that comfort. And it's no different when people are in mediation. So what do we risk when we don't create emotional safety and apply healthy communication? The parties become emotionally disconnected. They become defensive. They attack and they blame, and they're in denial, or they say nothing, and they're unwilling to change. And so that creates a sort of mediation that becomes exhausting. On top of being exhausted by Zoom, you have this standstill where parties are refusing to really open up with each other. So Shante, I'm not sure if you have the poll ready, or I'm wondering if this is a good time.
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
Let me pause this for 1 sec. And
So I'm interested in knowing about emotions, and whether you guys as mediators can identify when people are becoming emotional. And I asked Shante to create a survey or a poll to see how many of you can identify when people are becoming emotional. And I feel the question that I will be asking is how whether you bring emotions into the mediation, because a lot of times emotions is too scary because you just don't know where it's going to go. And so maybe perhaps we might want to push it away, neutralize it. But I feel like, when I'm not presenting, I'm a therapist and I provide therapy for high conflict families as well as co-parents. And the co-parents do not like each other. And so it becomes really difficult, and not bringing in the emotions can actually be detrimental. It's kind of like a fish swimming upstream. Sometimes you really have to bring it in, because you have to know, for the lack of a better word, you have to know what the enemy is, or you have to know what is going on. And bringing it in and really being able to facilitate that is, it's an art. It's not an easy thing to do, but I think it's necessary to bring in the emotions, because when we hide the emotions or push it away, people may not feel the resolution, or feel what they need to do is to be seen, and to have the other party know, it really hurt. That really hurt you. The PTSD with the police officer and the PTSD with the client, there is a bridge. You both experience PTSD. This is really hard for the both of you. being able to provide that is essential, rather than maybe obstructing it, denying feelings, because a lot of times people who feel like their emotions are denied may become even more upset.
Thank you. Shantae, are you ready with your poll?
I'm here. I have the poll, like I'm physically looking at it, but for some reason it's not allowing me to drop it into the meeting.
That's okay. I think that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we just do it by a raise of hands? I'm wondering if people who are not on screen can use the reactions. What is the question, Maria?
Do you allow
So
emotions to come into the mediation? Do you name the emotions?
Could we have a show of hands? And for those whose pictures are not on screen, oh, thank you, Carl. Do others know how to use that?
Yeah, except, as we discussed later, or earlier, before Maria was on, that this whole issue of identifying emotions and body language and all that stuff is considerably more difficult when you're doing the mediation virtually.
It really is.
But I have a question around that. How often are we mistaken about body language? I had this problem when I was prosecuting. There were times I would think that somebody in the jury box was really supporting my point of view, and end up they would be the person who was voting against me. And then the person who was sitting there looking kind of with a scowl, this was the person who, thought I made my case.
Mm-hmm.
So are there
And a lot of times the scowl might be them thinking, and so they might have that resting affect.
Yeah.
So they might actually be really thinking about it. The one who's nodding might, and I'm generalizing, but culturally some people just nod. I know that in Japan, people will say, yes, I heard you, and not necessarily, yes, I agree with you. And so
Yeah.
you hear yes,
Uh-huh.
it's different for different cultures.
So it's good to name it. It's like, it looks like you agree, it looks like you're upset, it looks like you're whatever, and then they can feedback, no, I'm really something else.
Yeah.
So often it's easy to misinterpret, but when you ask them to, it looks like you're really tired. No, I'm just, upset or something.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I think that watching and vetting the emotion is a way to be probative, to probe more. You can read that. So it's always good to be very alert as
Mm-hmm.
to movement, as to comments. Sometimes comments lead to things that open up an emotional snapshot.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's good. It's a tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's
What I like to say is, I'm noticing that a lot of emotions are coming up for you. What's coming up for you?
Uh-huh.
Or asking the person, the other party, did you notice that party A was really impacted when you said X, Y, and Z?
Right.
And then going back to party A and saying, can you tell us what happened? And maybe what's familiar about this, because it may not be the police officer that was really upsetting to them. Maybe it was a police officer before them. And so asking them, what's familiar about this? The injustice and the injustice of it all, and sometimes some people may say inflammatory things that are really upsetting, and naming it doesn't mean agreeing with it. So for instance, if somebody said, I hate Chinese people, and as you can see, I'm Chinese, I might say something different if I in real life, but as a mediator or a facilitator or a professional, I might say, oh, it sounds like you have a lot of strong emotion towards Chinese people. Tell me more. Tell me more about it. Well,
I think-
yeah.
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 I think that we were just initially earlier talking about bias and how we're trying to read into bias now. That the being probative on this on emotions and on body language can help us at least open that up to discussion. Not that it necessarily detects a certain bias, but at least it opens up the discussion. It might contain issues of a bias. I was just thinking about how you would reach and how you could, you know, in how you could possibly use or be able to detect with any degree of accuracy bias in the circumstance. But I think the idea of being able to bring it up into a discussion, we are able to get things from that.
Yeah. And I think people are really wanting to tell their stories.
Yes.
What is my story? I felt awful. And perhaps it really isn't that one event that made them feel so awful. Maybe it was so many different events.
Yeah.
And to let that police officer understand, maybe it's not just you, maybe it's the whole injustice.
Right.
There is that potential bridge. And it is an art. That's, you know, it's an art of mindful facilitation, because it's not easy.
No.
It's not easy to empathize as a professional, because there's a lot of things we have to say or think about. And that's why, you know, the very first thing that I said was, this is mindful facilitation. It's really important for us to leave ourselves behind, our biases, our hurt, and really allow the two parties to share their stories. The police officer has a story to tell too. It's really scary. You know, I've been wanting to serve my community for a very long time, and I'm sorry that it hurt you. And so there is the potential for healing, and we can be the bridge for the two parties.
You know, you raised something about the officers that I want to mention to the mediators. I don't know how much you are aware of the help you provide officers. When we have officers come in, they open up to you in a way that they don't open up normally, and certainly not if they're going through investigation. Each and every officer who comes in, of course, is nervous, even if they understand that mediation won't have any future consequences for them, because DPA represents authority and a lot of power in the city, and their careers are on the line, and they don't trust us in any fashion. I've seen this time and time again. I think Shantae would agree with me that you've given a place, a safe space for officers to speak and to talk. So I want to also compliment you on that as a big change from what they're used to in the work that they do.
We need them to, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry. What were you saying?
I was just going to say that we really need our police officers to be
We do.
bold and be courageous, and you know, and put input. We want them to because they obviously they're in the mix of the situation, and we need them to be open, clear, and we get a better idea of what the circumstances were at the given time, and how the officers reacted, and good or bad. You know, so it's good to, you know, to get that out, to feed the empathy aspect in that moment, and I think that's all very good. This is, again, we're probing, and we're getting evidence, we're getting information that's helpful in a given situation.
And I like to use the word curious. I'm curious because I think it's a neutral, safe word.
I just wanted to add that this conversation makes very clear how very important it is that the officers be on video and not just on the telephone, that it makes it very difficult for us to find that empathy if they are just a disembodied voice in the mediation. So I think, I mean, I hadn't actually thought earlier today when it was brought up that it's actually the officers are being, their positions being diminished because they're not on video, that in fact they are losing our ability to empathize with them when you can't see them. It's so difficult. Yeah. And I had another piece to that, which is, do you, in your practice or in your mindful facilitation, have things that you do differently when you're doing it virtually versus when you are working one-on-one in person?
I name things a lot more. I noticed that you looked away. I noticed that something's happening for you. What's happening for you? And really connecting the other person. If the other person says, I just don't care about this, then I would, bridge it back to that person and say, well, if you did care, what questions would you ask him? And so it's really bringing them back, because as a facilitator, it's not about us. It's about bringing them together. So what questions would you ask them? What did you hear? What did you notice? How did that impact you?
Thank
Would you be interested in learning about what the other person was thinking and what's familiar, which is really nice, because a lot of times they'll say, well, I guess it wasn't really this incident. It's just so many different incidents that has come to fruition. And I'm just mad at you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm also a volunteer for ALERT, the police volunteer thing, and I'm really struck. I've done a lot of trainings with them, of the sensitivity training that they are all they all learn, they all are taught. Last night I did a webinar on human trafficking. This one officer was talking about his experience, and I'm really struck by how sensitive all the teachers, officer teachers, have been about the subject, and about how they care, and about there's also a sense of it being, they're very friendly to each other. It's sort of like it's like being a soldier in a way. They're looking out for each other. But it's fascinating to sort of see the world from their viewpoint, or their perspective.
Yeah, and that's the story. They want their stories to be heard too. They just don't know it. And giving them that permission to say, what is your story?
Yeah, well, that's what's helpful too. A couple of these conferences, an officer came to talk about his or her experience, and I thought that was, or I was suggesting to Shante to have someone that came to mediation to talk about what it was like. So it's always helpful to hear the so-called the other side.
I know that it's almost, the presentation is almost over. I'm not sure if you want to.
Wonder if you can hear me. Oh, sorry, Maria. I've had a bad internet connection, and I just wanted to kind of add to what you were saying, that I often try to reflect the feelings, and I think it's sort of what you're calling naming it, where I'll say something like, I think I hear you saying that you felt this way. And then the police officer or community member can respond.
Oh, Suzanne? Oh, there. The reception is
We lost your sound.
Yeah.
Sorry. You add it to, oh, there you go. I think I hear you.
Sorry. I think I might have to tether my phone. I'm cutting out.
we can hear you now. Did you want to complete your thought?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Yeah, I don't know where I cut out, but my internet connection is lousy today. Anyway, I'm going to tether my phone.
Okay,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
You can, okay. Not sure where I cut out, but yeah, my question was sort of around reflecting emotions and trying to use those as a way to get to whatever's behind various parties' positions and get more information. So it's been a really good discussion in terms of learning how you best use those skills to elicit that information.
And I think of it as right brain to left brain. You can't get to the left brain without getting to the right brain. So, you know, this is what we do with kids when they steal a truck from the playground. We don't say, you stole the truck. That's not a good thing to do. It's not your truck. We'll say, oh, that kid took the toy away. You look really sad. That's really upsetting. You work with the emotions, and then you can say, well, you know, it wasn't your toy, but perhaps we can bring your toy the next time. And, you know, once they're calm and they're attuned to, that's what the adults need too. You know, we need that as well. We need that attunement, understanding of, yes, I did mess up, but you understand that I'm still human and I'm still a good person. Let's move over to the left brain. This is what we're going to do later on. And so we can't get to some reconciliation or mediation without first attuning to the right brain and then moving both to the left brain. And that is, you know, we're not swimming upstream just as fish, you know, the salmons do. It's really stressful. And by the end of the mediation, we might come out exhausted. Yeah. I know we're almost done, but I do have a few slides that we can go through quickly. Transformation happens. Okay. Should we? The next slide, please, Shantae. Next slide, please. Okay, well, so I'm not sure if you'll have access to these slides, but these are 9 healthy ways to communicate. And then in the next slide, it's unhealthy ways to communicate and being really mindful of that. And then in the next slide, I have the advanced mindful facilitation, where these are questions to bridge the two parties. I can see that you have some strong emotions, strong reactions to what she said, and we'll get to those. So you're really calming that person's amygdala, moving over, creating a bridge. But if you wanted to find out why she said that, what would be a good question to ask her? And then the second one is, what I heard you say is that you can't understand why she feels this way. Would you like to find out why? What would be a good question to ask him? What I heard was that this was not important to you, but it might be important to her. What would be a good question to ask him if you wanted to find out why? And so the goal is to create a bridge to the two of them, to create some sort of dialogue. But initially, the first thing to do is to calm their amygdala, really recognize their emotions. And special thanks to Lei Munhua. He is my mentor. And all of the contents you saw on this page were from the Stir-Fry seminar on consultation. And he will be having a seminar coming up soon. Oh, I think we can pass that, where the participants will learn how to notice intent and impact, advanced interventions, de-escalation culturally, and just really how to facilitate. And I would encourage you to participate if you're interested in learning how to facilitate mindfully. Thank you. Thank you all for listening. Yeah, does anyone have any questions?
Is that a hand? Jerry, are you raising a hand? I see your hand.
I do have a question. It says advanced mindfulness facilitation and training. Is there a prerequisite to that, or can we go?
I think as a mediator, you're advanced already. And now it's just really incorporating the mindfulness and bridging the two parties together.
So as a mediator, meditator, I would qualify.
You would qualify. As long as you can levitate.
I'm excited. We're in 2 more minutes of break. We went from 5 to 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Shanti.
Thank you, Maria, this was wonderful. We
Right.
appreciate the knowledge and information and just the sincere way that you present the information.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for inviting me. And I really do think you guys are doing a wonderful job. This is hard work.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you all.
Thanks. a
Yes,
lot,
thanks
Sharon.
very much. Yeah, it's good.
Super helpful.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
And I hope we can get slides. Will the slides be shared with us?
Yes,
Yeah.
this